about what sets this museum apart from other civil rights museums that you'll see in the U.S. We have a memorial outside that was dedicated in 1989, and this was the first memorial to those who lost their lives in the civil rights movement during the civil rights era. And I think this is really significant because you'll see in this first room we focus on these 40 men, women, children that we also have on the memorial. Many of their stories are interesting, I think, because some of them were activists that you typically don't hear about. Many of them grassroots organizers in deep South states like Alabama and Mississippi and so on. And then in the case where we include the children, like Emmett Till's story and the 4 girls who died in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, these became very tragic events of that time that we associate these children with having their lives taken simply because they were African American. And of course, there were more than the 40 people that we honor that died during that time. It's still ongoing research for a lot of people. But I think this is a great start for people to come through the museum and learn about the many stories that we have. You'll also notice that right here we display a case, and this was one of the Southern Poverty Law Center's cases they took on in the 1980s. The reason I mention them is because they are the reason we have the museum and the memorial here. Their office space is right across the street from us. Has anyone ever heard of the Southern Poverty Law Center? Okay, good, a few people. Well, it was founded here in 1971 by Morris Steeves and Joe Levin. Morris Steeves and Joe Levin were both born and raised here in Montgomery, and they lived through the civil rights era. So many events, of course, during that time shaped their perspective on just how unjust treatment was towards African Americans. They actually founded the Law Center, in Morris's words, to pick up where the civil rights movement left off. So many of the cases they took on were taking on civil rights issues, specifically racial injustice. In 1972, they took on a case to integrate the Alabama State Troopers, which was before then an all-white police force. But as the center grew, and they started to deal with a lot of hate and extremism, which is one of the things we still work on today. And when I refer to hate and extremism, I'm talking about specifically anti-Black violence from the Klan. This is one of those cases. If anyone's ever heard of Michael Donald's story, it's a very sad one. He was actually lynched by 2 Klansmen in Mobile, Alabama, and they targeted him because he was African American. So after this murder, Morris took on the case to bring a lawsuit against the Klan group responsible. And this Klan group was called the United Klans of America. They were a very big Klan group in Alabama, and they had headquarters in Tuscaloosa. Now, when he took on this lawsuit, we also knew that this group had very specific ties to violence during the Civil Rights era. For example, they were responsible for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. 3 of their members were later convicted in 1977, 2001, and 2002. And they also were responsible for the murder of another person we honor at the museum. Her name was Viola Liuzzo, and if you've ever heard of her, she was a civil rights activist from Detroit who came to help with the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. So fortunately, in 1987, a jury in Mobile, Alabama actually awarded Donald's mother $7 million and the headquarters of the United Klans. Which was really the first time this had ever happened, where a lawsuit had been brought against a hate group more generally, but also against the Klan, which bankrupted this specific group. So a year after this case, in 1988, Morris Steeves and Michael Donald's mother, Beulah Mae Donald, actually went to an NAACP state conference, and Morris spoke to a group of people about Michael Donald's case, but he also tied his case to so many instances of racial injustice that came before Michael Donald during the Civil Rights era, like the story of Emmett Till. And can anyone tell me a bit about Emmett Till's story? Yep, in the back. Yeah, so he was accused of whistling or saying something to a white store clerk in Money, Mississippi, and he was 14 years old, originally from Chicago, when he came to that small town in Mississippi to visit relatives one summer. And the result of that is that the store clerk's husband and brother-in-law brutally beat him, and when they found him, his body was mutilated. So I bring up Emmett Till's story among the many people that we honor here because this case, Emmett Till's story became a symbol of racial violence during the Civil Rights era, specifically because this happened so much. There are several hundred cases of people who died, who were killed during that time, but there was no hiding what happened to Emmett Till, in particular because his mother allowed an open casket funeral, which those images were circulated not just in Chicago and the community he was from, but all over the U.S., all over the country, all over, other countries saw this. So this was something I think that really propelled the civil rights movement forward. It affected people like Rosa Parks. It affected other activists like Thurgood Marshall and so many people we associate with the movement. So that's also why we commemorate these stories. Even though many of these people had no involvement in the civil rights movement, their deaths certainly had a big impact on those who decided to stand up and fight for certain rights that we enjoy today. So I want to give you all a few minutes to look around in this first room. Let me know if you have any questions, okay?